Guilty of genocide and torture, the Supreme Court of Bangladesh upholds the death sentence of an opposition leader. A special tribunal has delivered verdicts for several leaders of the Jamaat-e-Islami party. But are these trials fair, or is politics involved? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jane Dutton. A conservative political party in Bangladesh is calling for a countrywide strike to begin on Wednesday. It comes as one of its senior members lost an appeal against his death sentence. Mohammed Kamaruzzaman is the Assistant Secretary General of the Jamaat-e-Islami political party. Last year, he was found guilty of genocide and torturing civilians during the 1971 War of Independence with Pakistan. The party's leader and another senior member have also been sentenced to death in recent days for similar crimes. Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has called the trials a long overdue effort to obtain justice for war crimes 4 decades after Bangladesh split from Pakistan. But critics say she's using the tribunals to weaken the country's opposition parties. In a moment, we'll be talking to our guests. But first, this report from our correspondent in Dhaka, Mahasata.
Saidur Rahman is visiting a memorial for civilian victims of war crimes during Bangladesh's struggle for independence. During the war, Saidur's entire family, father, mother and 3 siblings were killed.
I always say that if I can draw 2 breaths before I die, with the first breath I will say a prayer to Allah, and with the second breath I will wish that the war criminals are punished for what they did.
The war for independence from Pakistan was short but bloody. Historians estimate 300,000 to 500,000 people were killed in 9 months by the Pakistani military and its local collaborators. That many of these collaborators have continued to live as free men is something that angers many. One of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's election promises was that she would finally bring war criminals to justice. However, the war crimes trials have been largely overshadowed by controversy, with critics claiming that the process has been politicized. Many of those on trial are leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami, Bangladesh's largest conservative political party. Last year, Jamaat activists took to the streets in protest, saying their leaders were being persecuted for being in the opposition ahead of a general election. Over 500 people were killed in the political violence that followed. This year had been quiet, no verdicts and no violence, until now. Some are concerned about the 3 verdicts that were announced over the past week.
Only the Supreme Court is supposed to know when the verdicts will be announced and what they will be. But we saw in the past weeks that several journalists are coming out well ahead of time and saying that the verdicts will be announced on these days and that they will be this and that. This raises questions.
The government says such allegations are baseless.
We are trying people who have actually committed war crimes, who have been responsible for genocidal acts, rape, mass killing. So to term this extreme violation of human rights and genocide into a political case defies imagination.
Regardless of the controversy, the death sentences are being hailed by many as bringing closure to a country that needs it. But with Jamaat responding by calling for a week-long general strike, there's tension once again in Bangladesh. Mahir Sattar, Al Jazeera, Dhaka.
Let's now bring in our guests. Joining us in Dhaka, Mofidul Hoque, co-founder and trustee of the Dhaka Liberation Museum, where he collects witness accounts of the war of 1971. In Geneva, Toby Cadman, lawyer representing the accused and international lobbyist for the Jamaat-e-Islami leadership. Also in Dhaka, on Skype, David Bergman, a reporter for New Age Dhaka and human rights activist. Welcome to all 3 of you. Toby Cadman, I'm going to come to you first. I should imagine that you've been pretty disappointed with this verdict.
Well, yes, we are disappointed. We had hoped that the Supreme Court would have looked more closely at some of the serious misgivings in the trial process. And nobody is doubting for a moment what occurred in 1971, but the concerns have always been that the manner in which these trials have been conducted, the quality of the evidence falls well below international standards. And even in the Supreme Court, there were recusal applications filed against 2 out of 4 judges for allegations of bias that were summarily dismissed. So of course we're disappointed, but this is the 3rd verdict that we've seen, 3rd death sentence we've seen in 6 days.
And what happens now? We know that his lawyer is appealing this verdict. Is it possible that there could be a change of course here?
Well, it's unlikely. What we're dealing with is not a further level of appeal, it's a review, because it's a capital punishment. And so what we are expecting are the same judges to effectively summarily dismiss the review as they did in the case of Abdul Qadir Mullah. Of course, there are other channels available to us, and one of the reasons why I'm in Geneva today is to file urgent appeals with the United Nations in respect of all 3 of these cases, but in particular Camaruzzaman, because he is now at great risk of being executed imminently. And we would certainly hope that the international community would lend its strong voice urging the government not to carry out this execution that is likely to send the country into further turmoil.
David Bergman, Toby Cadman there saying that an urgent appeal is necessary. What is your response to what has happened in the court, and give us a sense of the feeling on the street now? We know that obviously there are huge divisions over this issue.
It is a complex matter. First thing I think one ought to be very aware is that these trials are popular within Bangladesh. I mean, the opinion polls that have been done about them show that the vast majority of people support the process of trials seeking accountability for crimes that were committed in 1971. And although people do call the country divided, I don't think it's really fair to say that. There's been a long standing demand from quite a large section of people in Bangladesh for these trials. And that demand has a lot of popularity throughout the country. And
regardless of whether or not, as Toby says, the legal procedures have been flawed.
I think that actually is exactly the case. I mean, I think that it is correct to say that from a fair trial prism, there are significant concerns about the trials. Yet, nonetheless, you will not find a trial in Bangladesh that does meet international standards in any court in the country. And so many people will think, well, even if there are criticisms of these trials for fair on these matters of due process, why should these particular individuals be treated any differently? And that's an important matter to keep in perspective.
Mofidul Hoque, you've studied the 1971 war in great detail. You know a lot about the victims, the perpetrators. What is your response to what happened in the court today?
Well, not only today. In the last 1 week, we have got 3 verdicts, and almost all the major perpetrators has been put on the dock. They have faced the justice through due process of law, and one by one the verdicts is given. And I think when one is face to face with this establishment of justice process, one cannot forget the long years of denial of justice, and also the denial of the reality of 1971 genocide, which became a kind of forgotten genocide for international community. And the people have to struggle very hard to establish their right to justice. The process started after independence in 1973. The International Crimes Tribunal Act of Bangladesh was adopted in the parliament, and those were actually landmark legal documents, because the world community was not ready actually to address the international crimes at that time because of the Cold War rivalry. UN was in inaction, and one academic, Dian Orentlischer, has termed this period as 50 years of silence. What happened in the post-Nuremberg period till the establishment of ICTR and ICTY.
Knowing the verdicts that have been handed down, I mean, do you think it's correct considering what these men are alleged to have done?
Well, we think that the people have established the right to justice, and now the tribunal is working and delivering the justice following the due process of law. This is a open court. There were all kind of opportunities given both to the prosecution and defense, and I think the verdict will speak for themselves, that how the process was followed and what actually these persons who have been indicted for the worst kind of crimes against humanity and genocide, the verdicts, I think, will speak for themselves.
Well, let's take a closer look at the convicted leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami. Mohammed Kama Ruzaman, the man that we've been mainly focusing on today, the Assistant Secretary General of Jamaat-e-Islami, was found guilty of genocide and torture by a special war crimes tribunal in May last year. The same tribunal sentenced party chief Mutir Rahman Nizami to death last week for war crimes. Another leader, Mir Qasem Ali, was also given the death penalty on Sunday, and the former party leader Ghulam Azam died in late October in a government hospital in Dhaka. He was 91. David Bergman, I want to pick up that point. I mean, it's taken so long for any sort of justice to be seen in the country, and I know there's a lot of anger on the streets that many of those perpetrators have been allowed to walk free, live a normal life.
I think that's a very important issue to keep in mind when you think about these trials, because as Mofidul Hoque has said, these very serious crimes were committed in 1971. The numbers of death are disputed, but very large numbers, hundreds of thousands of people. The official figures are 3 million, very large numbers. And the Jamaat-e-Islam as a political party did collaborate with the Pakistan military at that time and did support the fight against independence. Yet, despite that, over the years, because of various issues relating to the way politics took place in the country, the Jamaat-e-Islami was able to grow as a political party and became a significant actor in politics. So 40 years later, there was a situation in the country where many of the leaders of Jamaat-e-Islami, who people believed had been involved in collaborating with the Pakistan military during '71, were powerful politicians who seemed to be completely able to escape any possibility of accountability. And the joy that some people feel in relationship to the trial verdicts has to be seen within that context, that they have waited a long time to see the possibility of men who they believe were seriously involved in crimes during the independence war to be brought to justice.
Toby, that's an important point, isn't it? I mean, if these men are guilty, then at least, I mean, there are so many reasons and allegations behind, you know, what's actually going on at the moment, or whether there's a political incentive or not. But surely it's important that they do face some kind of justice for the atrocities that they committed.
I mean, first of all, I would say, and I've always said, that this is a highly politicised process, and I don't consider these to be proper trials. That being said, of course, it's absolutely essential that there is a process of accountability. I've maintained that position in the 3 years that I've been involved in these trials, that it is actually shameful that there hasn't been a process of accountability in the 40+ years since this war took place. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the worst conflicts in history. And so it is very difficult for me to understand why there hasn't been more attention to this particular issue over the last 4 decades, and that's not solely blaming the various Bangladesh governments. That's blaming the international community for not having addressed this for such a long period of time. I take the point entirely that there is a great deal of support amongst Bangladeshis that there is a process of accountability. That is to be expected when you're looking at a conflict of this nature, irrespective of however many people we want to say died during the conflict. This is still one of the worst conflicts in history, and so there has to be a process of accountability. The issue, however, is the manner in which this particular tribunal is being done, and I don't think that we can paper over the very big cracks that we have experienced, both at the trial process and as part of the appeal, that is where the issue lies, and that is where we have repeatedly called on the international community to say this is a process that needs to be dealt with.
I was going to ask you, excuse me, jumping in here, what exactly is it that you want the international community to say? And considering that Bangladesh is going to be taking up a seat at the UN Human Rights Assembly, what sort of pressure do you think could be put on Bangladesh, and could it be successful in any way?
Well, Bangladesh has just been re-elected. I mean, they served on the Human Rights Council previously, and that they've been re-elected to the Human Rights Council. That in itself is not a huge step, because there are a number of other countries that have an equally appalling human rights record that are on the Human Rights Council. The point is that, and the issue that we have been raising with the United Nations and a number of Western governments, is that recognising that there must be a process of accountability, and recognising that you have to take the politics out of this process, there should be, and I do not consider it too late, that there should be an internationally supervised process. All of these trials, my personal view, having looked at the very serious flaws, that there should be a proper inquiry, because we're not talking about procedural irregularities. We are talking about allegations of government interference, perjury, political and judicial misconduct at a very high level. That in itself is sufficient to render any trial in breach of international standards, and retrials should be ordered.
Toby, I'm going to bring in Mofidul here. He's been trying to say something. Mofidul?
I think, I think these are all, coming from someone who has been engaged by the defense to be their spokesperson, to be their lobbyist, and these are not the voice of those who anyone can have a critical appraisal of the whole justice process. But there cannot be any denying of the right of the justice, and also the justice could not be established for long 40 years, because when Bangladesh made a lone start in 1973, there were many international pressure. Bangladesh was not even allowed to be a member of the United States till 1974, and the Pakistani prisoner of wars who have been accused for war crimes had to be repatriated. And then in 1975, with the brutal killing of the father of the nation and also the leaders of the Liberation War, the whole process was upturned. And then there was long denial of justice, trampling of the right of the victims, and the right to justice was established through the election which was held in 2008. It was not an issue of a particular political party or setting the political vendetta. It was the major issue for which the victims were struggling for long years, and also the new generation. They have overwhelmingly supported this issue. That's why in the election in 2008, which was a free and fair election by all counts, the party and the alliance which uphold this right to trial has been overwhelmingly supported by the electoral verdict.
Okay, and you're certainly laying out what sort of support there is for any sort of process, and Toby has agreed that justice should have been done a long time ago. But Toby, is there anything that you fancy picking up on those comments?
Well, I think what the gentleman from the Liberation War Museum has said, I've never disagreed with that. We would both agree that there should be a process of accountability. We both agree that it's 4 decades late, and there's been a lot of international interference in dealing with that process, whether it's in 1973 or 2008, when the United Nations was trying to put this on their agenda. So there is international assistance, and it's quite common knowledge that there were countries such as Pakistan and France that opposed that process. So I don't disagree at all that this is a demand of the nation, and I've never disagreed with that. There has to be a process of accountability. It's just, unless you can guarantee a fair trial, and I do not see that that is possible under these conditions, it constitutes an abusive process to put a person on trial.
Okay, Toby, sorry, I'm going to jump in here quickly. Bangladesh blames Pakistani soldiers and its local allies for the atrocities of the 1971 War of Independence. It says that around 3 million people were killed during the 9-month conflict. An estimated 200,000 women were raped, and about 10 million people were forced to take shelter in refugee camps in neighbouring India. Jamaat-e-Islami had openly campaigned against independence from Pakistan, but denied committing war crimes. David, I want to pick up on the international issues raised by both of our guests, and I just want to talk to you about the sort of interference or the concerns expressed by countries like Turkey and Saudi Arabia at the moment, levelled at Sheikh Hasina, and the fact that she is going through this court process. What's the worry there, and what sort of pressure is being put on her?
Well, first of all, I think it's somewhat laughable for Saudi Arabia to be criticising the Bangladesh criminal justice system. I'm not an expert in the Saudi Arabian justice system, but I don't think it's that much better, at all better. I'm sure it's far worse than the Bangladesh system. There's clearly politics afoot here, to the extent that it appears that certain other Muslim-majority countries or Muslim countries feel that they need to put pressure on the Bangladesh government to in some way affect the trial process, bring it to an end, or bring it to an end that they feel is acceptable. And the argument that you often hear being put by these countries, those who support that, is that this is a completely political trial, that the government is out to get the opposition. Now, Toby Cadman may well be right in certain respects, that this is politics has played an important part in this tribunal process, and to some extent that's unacceptable. But nonetheless, the people on trial are not on trial because they are political opponents of this regime. They're on trial because there has been long-standing allegations against them for war crimes. I mean, they were members of the Jamaat, or members of the student wing, leaders of the student wing of the Jamaat. That party did collaborate with the Pakistan military. There was a force called the Al-Bada, which was a militia that is known to have assisted the Pakistan military in killing civilians. So the leaders of the Jamaat and the student wing do have a case to answer. Now, the fact that they are now members of an opposition party is neither here nor there. And sure,
David, laying all of that out, sorry, excuse me jumping in here, do you think, I mean, this was an election promise made by Sheikh Hasina. Do you think it's been worth it for her? There have been such enormous demonstrations on the streets. We're expecting many more, many deaths last year, 500 people killed because of this process. Do you think it's been worth it for her and the country so far?
Well, I think if we look at the politics of the issue in terms of the Awami League, I mean, what is important to recognise is that it was never very completely clear that the Awami League, after the election that brought them into power in 2009, would actually hold tribunals. There had been, in the previous couple of years, quite significant campaigns to hold trials, but previously the Awami League, when they had been in government, didn't hold trials when under similar kind of pressure. So it's important to recognise that the Awami League were to some extent forced into holding these trials. Now, maybe they also thought at the time it was politically convenient for them to do so, but it also, I think they recognised that a significant part of their vote bank did want this level of accountability to take place. And I think the trials have politically stood her in good stead. And I think that there is a segment of the country who support the Awami League solely because of her conduct in holding these trials.
I'm going to quickly throw that to Mofidul Hoque very briefly, if you can summarise about whether this has been a good or a bad thing for her and for the country, very briefly.
I think most important thing is what is good or bad for the country or for the nation, that we have established the right to justice, and in the International Criminal Court, I mean ICC statute, it has been said in the preamble that when such mass atrocities happen, it is the duty of the nation to deliver justice, and Bangladesh has met this challenge. And I think it is a domestic court, but the trial is for international crimes against humanity. And the person who have been accused, there has been indictment, there has been charge framing, and there is argument and counter-argument that went on in the court. They had been accused for particular crimes, particular atrocities, but that atrocities was part of a widespread and systematic killing of the attack against the civilians, that is crimes against humanity, and it's a crimes against mankind. I think it is the now duty of the mankind to come up and address this issue of justice, which has been delivered by the Bangladesh court following the due process. It has got nothing to do with the political feud or battle, but it has to do with a political philosophy.
Thank you so much to all my guests. Mofidul Hoque with those final words, Toby Cadman and David Bergman. And do please add your thoughts to this discussion if you wish. You can leave your comments on facebook.com/AJE-Inside Story. We also on Twitter at AJE-Inside Story and at Jane Dutton. That's where you can find us. I'm Jane Dutton. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.